Yes, friends, it's that time again. We're coming up on yet another major event in the history of the Emerald Empire, the heresy of the Five Rings. But in order to fully appreciate this event, I must once again summon forth that which the internet despises above all else. It is time to provide context. As such, this particular video is going to focus on the religion of the Emerald Empire of Rokugan, Shinseism. A brief overview of its origins, its doctrines, and some of the major sects that comprise it. And so we begin by taking the clock all the way back to before the founding kami fell from the heavens. Back in those days, before there even was an empire, when humans simply lived across Rokugan in small scattered tribes, their principal spiritual tradition was Kami no Michi, literally the way of the gods, essentially the worship of the thousand fortunes. Fortunes being essentially a catch-all term for various gods and spirits that the Rokugani people venerated and made offerings to. As a general rule, this was divided into three broad categories. At the very top were the two most powerful entities of the pantheon, the Lady Sun and the Lord Moon. Pretty self-explanatory, not only are they the bringers of light and warmth, but they are the architects of the universe, the ones that created the world as we know it. Below them were the so-called Seven Fortunes, the most powerful and most revered of these spirits. The Seven Fortunes governed specific and crucial virtues of Rokugani morality. Benten was the fortune of romantic love, Bishamon the fortune of strength, Daikoku the fortune of wealth, Ebisu the fortune of honest work, Fukuro Kujin the fortune of wisdom and mercy, Hotei the fortune of contentment, and Jorojin the fortune of longevity. Below these in turn were the minor fortunes, which ran the gamut from Emao, the fortune of death, to Hikora, the fortune of oak trees. Minor fortunes could essentially be responsible for anything from specific classes of people, to philosophical concepts, to aspects of nature. Finally, below these were the spirits of the ancestors. Unlike fortunes, ancestor spirits cannot bestow blessings or grant supernatural aid to those who call upon them. But they can give advice, and are usually called upon by their descendants for guidance as to what they should do next at a crucial moment. Clans like the Lion, for instance, take the example of their ancestors very, very seriously. This was the religion of the Rokugani people prior to the coming of Shinsei and his famous writings, the so-called Tao of Shinsei. The Tao, mostly recorded by the Kami Shiba, is comprised of the dialogue between the first Hantei and Shinsei himself, as well as many of the little sage's proverbs and teachings made as he searched across the empire to gather the Seven Thunders for the great confrontation with Fu Lang. And while the Tao of Shinsei was mostly accepted, there were 2 points of opposition. The first were the Isawa family, who initially believed that Shinsei's teachings went against the worship of the fortunes. However, after decades of studying it character by character, the Isawa family's best scholars realized that not only was there nothing wrong with Shinsei's teachings, but that it was perfectly compatible with the worship of the fortunes. The other point of opposition came from Okodo, kami founder of the Lion Clan. Even after the first Hantei made it mandatory that every dojo in his empire should have a copy of the Tao of Shinsei, Okodo expressly forbade his clan from ever opening it. Thus, the copy of the Tao in every Lion dojo is always sealed. For Okodo and the clan that he founded, Bushido mattered, not the path to enlightenment that Shinsei advocated. By contrast, Togashi and his Dragon Clan became the ones most dedicated to the teachings of Shinsei and their ultimate goal, which is achieving enlightenment. At last, by decree of Emperor Genji, second Emperor of Rokugan, the Tao of Shinsei and the old worship of the fortunes was to be officially combined into a single religion. Thus, Shinseism was born. And from the initial pool of scholars and students of the little teacher following his disappearance from the Emerald Empire was born its main institution, the Brotherhood of Shinsei. The Tao itself is mostly comprised of dozens of scrolls divided roughly into 3 books. The Book of Discussion, which chronicles Shinsei's travels and the many conversations he had with various spirits. The Book of Duties, in which Shinsei lays out the behavioral and moral requirements for being a monk, 225 requirements in total. The most prominent, and only ones ever mentioned, being the 4 vows: to save all living beings, to eliminate defilements, to learn the teachings of Shinsei, and to seek enlightenment. And finally, the Book of the Soul, not written by Shinsei himself, but rather by the founders of the Brotherhood, its primary purpose being to resolve any possible discrepancies between kami worship and the Tao of Shinsei, as well as including treatises on psychology and how Shugenja should conduct themselves and practice magic. The most complete copy of the entire Tao of Shinsei resided in Gisei Toshi, and so of course it was almost entirely destroyed in 283 by the rampage of the Akuma no Oni. Even the best efforts of the Asako family could only result in an impartial recreation of the Tao. Still, enough of it survived that at least students can get an understanding of what Shinsei's teachings are all about, even if they can't agree on exactly what it's all about. Of course, the big elephant in the room regarding Shinseism is the fact that there really is no explicit doctrine ever stated in any of the sources. The best idea of what Shinsei was all about comes from a long list of quotes ostensibly from the Tao of Shinsei, and even then it hardly covers the religious doctrine to any great extent. One of the few things that is made clear about Shinseism is the idea of the 5 elements being an illusion, or rather, the differences between them. According to Shinseism, everything in the universe originated from the void, and eventually it will all return to the void. Part of the path to enlightenment is in embracing the oneness of the elements, seeing past the illusion that appears to make them different from one another, which also ties into the idea of the difference being spiritual and physical being mere illusion. And speaking of things that originate in the void and return to it, there is the concept of chi, or ki. According to Shinsei, it is because humans possess this chi within themselves that they will not linger in the realm of death, yomi, forever, but instead the soul transmigrates through a cycle of rebirth. But of course, these are pretty broad concepts, each of them open to interpretation, and this leads to the purpose of the Great Convocations. Beginning in the year 44 of the Empire, every 10 years, the best monks, shugenja, priests, and scholars in the Empire convene in one place, usually at Shinsei no Sumaimura, or Holy Home Village, and discuss any new ideas or insights that have come up in the past decade, thus keeping the Tao of Shinsei regularly updated. But of course, not all disagreements can be so neatly resolved by discussion, and this leads neatly into the sects. There are ostensibly many different sects of Shinseism across the empire, but generally only 6 have been described with any detail. And the first 2 are less sects and more occupations within the Brotherhood of Shinsei, the Sohei and the Yamabushi. What sets Sohei apart from the other members of the Brotherhood is that they practice the martial arts. Generally, the Tao of Shinsei disapproves of violence, but after all, holy men in temples need defending sometimes. The Sohei are just a neat, pragmatic solution to this problem, and there really isn't much more to say about them. The Sohei are warrior monks. They're less a sect and more of a vocation. The only reason they are counted among the 6 great sects is that they are so numerous. The other sect/vocation being the Yamabushi, or mountain men. As their name suggests, the Yamabushi are generally active in the mountainous regions of the empire, namely the northern mountains, particularly the lands of the Dragon Clan, and the spine of the World Mountains that bisects the empire on a roughly northwest-southeast trajectory. The Yamabushi generally favor this isolation as they believe it brings them closer to a connection with the natural world. Enlightenment, they believe, can only be achieved by observing the elements of nature in their most primal state, far from the spiritual interference of civilization. The other noteworthy practice of the Yamabushi is their tendency to arrange themselves in groups of 5, 1 monk for each of the elements. Naturally, most of their shrines and temples reside in the mountains, the most prominent of these being the Shrine of the 7 Thunders, constructed in honor of the 7 heroes who gave their lives against Fu Leng. The next major sect of note is the Lotus Sect. They are so named for their strict adherence to what Shinsei called the 8 petals of the lotus: right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. According to the Lotus Sect, these alone are the proper ways to achieve enlightenment. All other things are superfluous. They are mostly known for living in isolation, even by monk standards, focusing on Zen meditation, and for regularly repeating the phrase, "all homage to the Lotus Sutra." Lotus members believe that a single completely sincere utterance of this phrase is enough to instantly give you enlightenment. For those familiar with real-world Buddhism, this kind of sounds like an odd blend of 2 real sects in Japan: Pure Land Buddhism and, of course, Zen Buddhism. Next is the Rinzai sect, also known as the Questioners. Founded by Nonin, one of Shinsei's first followers, the Questioners take the premise that reality is an illusion to a whole nother level. As their name implies, they pretty much question the reality of everything, up to and including the celestial order itself, which most Rokugani consider the foundations of the universe. After all, if everything is an illusion, why should the celestial order be exempt? These guys are so ascetic, they don't even bother with monasteries or temples. On the other hand, questioners tend to be friendly and humorous fellows as monks go, and they have an odd tendency to pull pranks on other people, mostly as a way of breaking their preconceptions, which is of course all in keeping with their emphasis on everything is an illusion. They are also very, very fond of koans, those ridiculously cryptic riddles that Zen Buddhists in the real world like to use. Things like the famous, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" In fact, the questioners are so fond of koans that they consider them the only valid method of teaching enlightenment to people. And now we come to arguably the 2 biggest sects of the Brotherhood of Shinsei, starting with the Shinto sect. Founded in 254 at the 12th Great Convocation, the Shintoists broke with a lot of the established traditions of Shinseism, namely that monks should not avoid hard labor. If anything, they encourage monks to earn their keep in the world, that they shouldn't have to spend more than 5 years in a monastery, and that monks don't even have to be celibate. The biggest defining aspect of Shintoism is its emphasis on meditation and rejection of formal teachings. The questioners have a similar belief in this regard, mainly because the questioners started off as an offshoot of the Shintoists. The Shinto argument is that meditation is the only true way to reach enlightenment. Studying the Tao of Shinsei is unnecessary. Shinto masters are fond of saying, Shinsei didn't have the benefit of the Tao of Shinsei to achieve enlightenment, so why should you? Like most of the Brotherhood of Shinsei, the Shintoists believe that rejection of the self and attachment to the physical world is necessary to achieve enlightenment. They just happen to think that study, even study of the Tao, itself creates attachment to the physical world, hence their rejection of formal teaching and examination of the sutras. And finally, the second of the 2 major sects, the Shinmaki order. This sect is in fact the oldest sect of the Brotherhood of Shinsei, predating Shintoism by 20 years as it was founded in 234 at the 10th Great Convocation by a monk named Baso, who claimed to have recovered a lost scroll written by Shinsei which he called the Diamond Sutra. This caused a great deal of controversy, especially when some pointed out that the Diamond Sutra looked mostly like a reinterpretation of the pre-existing Lotus Sutra, and some even accused Baso of writing the Diamond Sutra himself. Nevertheless, Baso's ideas were recognized by the Great Convocation, thus creating the Shinmaki sect, sometimes also called the Shingon sect. According to Shingonism, the Tao of Shinsei is just the beginning of the path towards enlightenment, and that emphasis should be placed on studying the Diamond Sutra. In contrast to the Shintoists, who reject most of the restrictions on behavior for monks, the Shingonists are strict adherents. And where the Shintoists say that meditation alone is necessary to achieve enlightenment, the Shingonists think that study, particularly of the Diamond Sutra, is not only a valid path to enlightenment, but that this can also be achieved by understanding ritual and the worship of the ancestors. The way the Shingonists view it, enlightenment can only be found in that which is difficult to understand. Otherwise, everybody would already be enlightened, and there would be no need for the teachings of Shinsei. Most of the rituals and practices of the Shingonist sect are kept secret from outsiders. But there are two exceptions to this. One is the rather alarming practice of Shingonist monks to meditate amidst corpses, which they believe helps them recognize the foulness of their own physical bodies, which of course is a hindrance to enlightenment. The other noteworthy aspect of Shingon monks is their complete disregard for courtesy, politeness, and social conventions. They consider these distractions from what really matters, and so Shingon monks are rather infamous for being completely honest and bluntly spoken. But if there are sects like the Shingon that are officially recognized by the Brotherhood, there are also false paths, teachings and beliefs that are considered, for lack of any better word, heresy. Examples of monks who have strayed from the proper teachings of Shinsei include Bunrakuken, who completely abandoned the Tao of Shinsei and instead embraced worship of Onotangu, the Lord Moon, thus founding the infamous Cult of the Dead Moon. Roshungi, who fell prey to the corruption of the Shadowlands, joined the Lost, and with his disciple Michio co-founded the infamous Order of the Spider. There was Fudo, an extremely bitter monk who espoused the radical idea that there is no right or wrong way to achieve enlightenment, that every person should seek his or her own path, and that not just all teachings should be rejected, but all principles and morality should be thrown out as well. Unsurprisingly, many of his followers, the Fudoists as they came to be known, were particularly vile and depraved individuals. Thus, the Brotherhood declared Fudoism a false path. The monk himself and his followers left the Emerald Empire and eventually settled in the Ivory Kingdoms, L5R's fantasy equivalent of India. And with that, this video on the Brotherhood of Shinsei is effectively concluded, as soon enough we will be delving into arguably the most famous false path in the history of Rokugan, the heresy of 5 rings. Until then. It is the Sengoku Jidai. Besieged and surrounded by his enemies, a lord pays a group of men to see his only child to safety. But do they have the skill to ensure her safety? And can they even be trusted? For this is an age of honor and treachery, of blood and valor, of gold and steel. Now available at Amazon, Smashwords, and at StudioBrainstorm.net. Links in the description.